you so much for having us. Thank you, Nika, for the welcome and for you all for being here. I love this place. Spent many happy sessions here working on different things and different projects over the years, so it's really nice to be back. Today, Sam and I decided that we would start by giving a little, I guess, overview of our individual practices, and then the sort of last half of the talk will be on our collaborative work over the last sort of 5 years. And this work is really focused on the role of computational technologies in the climate crisis. But to start with, my interest is really infrastructure. My background, environmental engineering, and in my artwork that sort of spans installation and online work, I focus on making systems. So I'm really interested in engineering as a culture, what gets hidden and assumed in processes of making infrastructure, and the politics of this. So infrastructure, if we think about this as the basic systems and services such as transport, power, water, all of these kinds of things that support a country, organisation or population to work effectively. And so I'm really interested in what that means, like what does effectively mean, for who, at what cost. And sometimes my work looks like this, so making sort of a laundromat system that attempts to structure a mutualism between, say, a wetland and the human users of the system. And I call this approach to art making eccentric engineering. So where eccentric means strange, unusual, unconventional. In mathematics, it's a term that describes not having a centre or being off-centre. And so I'm really trying to publicly prototype systems where, you know, conventionally human-centred technologies or systems are displaced in some way. So what does it look like to try and make infrastructures that are ecosystem-centred or that centre other species? So what does it mean to try to design a water system that centres the flourishing of other species as much as it does the needs of the human? Maybe that means redefining what success is. Maybe that means it's not just about getting your underwear as wide as possible, but it's also about, you know, what the plants and microbes and all the other living things in that system are doing. I talk about eccentric engineering as combining methods from systems engineering, social practice, critical engineering, ontological design to offer a critique. But I also want to generate new possibilities, imaginaries, and approaches for designing. How do we act in concert with the environment and serve ecosystemic goals? Someone who was also writing and thinking about what art can do that engages with infrastructure in this way is Sarah Hendren. Brilliant design scholar. If you haven't come across her stuff, I really recommend looking at her writing and work. And she, you know, talks about technology engages practices that sort of address these two different posts, critique or repair, and often, you know, do one thing better than the other. So what does critique do? It unmasks, it subverts, it negates the mainstream, something that the arts and humanities are, you know, incredibly good at and value a lot. What does repair language suggests? New futures, it invites possibilities. It's more at home in the world of engineering, right? Where it's trying to ask, what if we did things differently? And so in my own practice, I'm sort of trying to engage with both positions, right? Critique through a proposition. And just to give you a quick example of a project I've been working on over the last few years that attempts this is a work called Solar Protocol. It's a big, messy community project made with Alex Nathanson, Benedetta Piantella, and a whole bunch of volunteers around the world. And it really started we started looking at the energy and water impacts of the cloud, right? That cloud-based technologies, what are they? Servers, transmission, the internet that supports a lot of our daily activities. A lot of cloud-based companies claim to be carbon neutral, something that the latest AI boom is really thrown into question. And this is a map of like all the different gas projects that are being proposed in the next few years, mainly due to data center and AI energy demands. We're also super inspired by this particular project, which was a solar-powered website launched to host Low Tech magazine. And the thing I love about this website is that it occasionally goes down when their solar server runs out of power. The website goes offline. Amazing, right? It really brings to our attention that these systems are material. But we got to thinking, well, what if we made some solar servers into a network? Like, would they have to all go offline? Maybe one could take over if it's got more sunshine than another. And so we started playing around with these servers, sent a bunch out to people around the world, and set up servers in different time zones, different latitudes, different weather systems. And so our servers sort of work as a network, and they collectively host a website called solarprotocol.net that looks like this. And we wrote some custom networking software so that every few minutes all the servers check in with each other, and whichever is in the most sunshine at the time becomes the server to serve the web platform. And so users are sent to that particular location that has the most energy, that has the most sunshine. So the routing behavior across the network, here's a graph of the data. Each line in the graph is a server, and the green shows when it was the one responsible for sending out the website, and the red is the solar power at the time. So you can see that the traffic is routed across the network according to the sun. And so in a way, we are automating network traffic in this system using the sun as a logic. So instead of outsourcing it to an AI model or to statistics or whatever, we're saying, no, let's let the environment program how this system of infrastructure works. So we're enlisting the sun to be that agent that is automating the network. And that's that same data just presented in a sort of lovely radial format. We also did a lot of work to try and reduce the size of the website, the energy demand. So I'm very interested in this question, what does design and culture look like in a low carbon or carbon zero world? Maybe we need to rethink what we aspire to when we're designing our interfaces. But you know, the hardest thing about this project was getting Port 80 opened in a lot of places where our volunteers were hosting servers. So it's hard to host this at universities because IT departments don't let you do that. Also, you know, our stewards would break up with their partners and move houses, and the server would go offline, and then it would be in storage for 6 months. And, you know, it really brought in the social and the personal dimensions of people's self-hosting infrastructure in a really interesting way. But to return to that question of art as critique or proposition, you know, the work moves from a critique of the status quo of how we're currently building our cloud or our internet, and it proposes a sort of, it suggests another way of doing things, right? What if we tried to design systems that were more within planetary limits? Maybe these systems would be slower, maybe they would have a very different look and feel. What would it mean to try to design with the environment and its intelligences rather than relying on artificial ones? And we just host a bunch of stuff on there. So there's also an online exhibition up there at the moment, and yeah, we're using it for different projects at the moment. Yeah.
Great, thank you. Yeah, so I'll talk a little bit about a framework that I use in my own practice that I've been calling scrapism. Scrapism is the use of web scraping as a cultural, political, or poetic practice. So, you know, what is web scraping? It's just when you write a program to browse the web on your behalf, downloading text and images and videos or other material as you go. Web scraping is a very common practice in Silicon Valley. Facebook began as a web scraping project called FaceMash that allowed Mark Zuckerberg to very problematically rank the attractiveness of his classmates. So that's like an interesting, that's like the origin of Facebook, right? Google and all other search engines are also, at heart web scrapers, right? They're downloading and indexing web content, and in doing so, they're taking something that is open and they're privatizing it. And of course, machine learning projects are also mostly made with data scraped from the web. So, Stable Diffusion, trained on images downloaded from the open web. ChatGPT also has its origins in text scraped from the web. My interest in web scraping is motivated by a question of how we can come to terms with the fact that everything we do online and offline, if there's even a valid distinction anymore, is tracked, it's exploited, it's mined for profit, and that all our personal, seemingly ephemeral traces that we leave behind are converted into structured data and stored in perpetuity. That our human experiences are turned into predictive machine learning models and into business models. And so this leads to a broader question for me, which I think is particularly important in the era of AI, about what should be a commodity and what shouldn't be a commodity, what we allow as a society to be bought and sold. Okay, so a recent project that I've been working on that falls under this rubric of scrapism is called NYPD Coppelganger. And NYPD Coppelganger uses data about the NYPD to explore AI systems deployed by the police, specifically facial recognition. I began this project with the goal of collecting the face of every single cop in New York City. I didn't quite succeed. I'm still working on it, but I did manage to scrape around 11,000 unique cop faces, which is about 1/3 of the total New York cop population. There's a lot of cops in New York. And after I had collected the source data, I put these images through, I'd say a fairly cutting edge open source facial recognition system. So cops will frequently cover up their names and badges at protests. So you can use this system to ID cops who might be acting inappropriately, and it works on mobile, right? And so it really can be a tool for those of us who are disempowered by the police. But you can also just toss in a photo of yourself to see what cop you most resemble. And so here are some of my matches. Is it playing the video? Oh, it finished playing. Okay, yeah. Great. And you can also do it with celebrities too. I think that one's a pretty good match. One thing that's also very interesting about having access to data like this and doing your own forms of data collection, particularly with this face stuff, is that you kind of get other interesting opportunities as well, right? So after I had downloaded all the cop faces and gotten the cop embeddings, the facial embeddings, you can also sort of see what cops most resemble each other. So these are some of my favorite Coppelganger facial clusters. I think the bottom row is actually those chins, the terrifying cop chins. And then other forms of very basic data analysis are possible, right? So this is the most common cop names in New York, around almost 4% of cops in New York are named Michael. So if you yell Michael to a group of cops, someone will look at you, probably. But I'm very interested in this idea of we ourselves are sort of being used as material by the police in a certain sense, right? Our faces are data trails and stuff. And so for me, there's a way of let's use them as material, right? Let's analyze them, and then there's a kind of different, an emerging power dynamic that's a bit different. And to go back to web scraping more generally for a second, I think it's really important to realize that most websites, they're not really just apps or documents. They're actually the front ends to databases. So LinkedIn is a database of labor data. GoFundMe is a database of health data. Facebook is a database of social relations. AP News is a database of current events. The information these databases contain is either about us, directly about us, or it might be useful to us, but mostly it's locked away. And what scraping lets us do is re-database the web, right? So we get to make our own database. We get to take those databases, and now they're databases on our computers without the mediation that those companies usually force us to go through. I think this is particularly important because, you know, a website or a company like LinkedIn or GoFundMe, these are not like the state, right? But they increasingly take on state-like roles. They structure so many aspects of our social, political, and economic lives, right? They mediate our access to life-giving services. And the question we should all be asking is, like, what does it mean that these companies, you know, are now rushing headfirst into generative media and even further enclosing the data that they have about us? To reference one of my favorite writers, James C. Scott, for a moment, both states and state-like entities engage in bureaucratic processes that simplify reality in order to shape and apprehend it. So scrapism, the goal of scrapism is to provide that same synoptic or bird's eye view that website owners and reality shapers have, with all the possibilities, but also the limitations that that type of view affords. And in regards to, you know, machine learning, scraping lets us audit training data to better understand existing systems or to create our own.
Okay, so with my interest in engineering and the environment and Sam's focus on data and the business model of the internet, you've done a lot of work on that. In 2015, we got thinking and talking about the increasingly central role computation was having in the climate crisis. And the fruits of our discussions led to the launch of an exciting new NGO, the Intergovernmental Panel on Capitalism. Is that going to work? Yes. So the IPC is what we call ourselves, and we based our organisation on a model established by the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, but just with one key difference.
We didn't have a lot of, you know, resources or money at the time, so to launch the IPC, we just transformed all of the IPCC's documents about climate change into an equally truthful corpus about capitalism, and we just make this, you know, very simple change. We swap the phrase climate change with the word capitalism, and luckily when you do make this change, the grammar and meaning of sentences remains intact or even enhanced. So here are some of the vital discoveries that we made, like capitalism over the 21st century is projected to increase displacement of people. And the overall risks of capitalism impacts can be reduced by limiting the rate and magnitude of capitalism. So these are very small snippets from thousands and thousands of pages of reports that we've auto-replaced. Of course, we have the website and a very extensive video archive. I will just play you a quick snippet from the video archive.
In 1988, the World Meteorological Organization and the United Nations Environment Programme had the foresight to recognize that the emerging issue of capitalism would soon rise to the top of the global agenda. By jointly establishing an intergovernmental panel on capitalism, the governing bodies of WMO and UNEP ensured that future decision-making about capitalism would be based on sound science.
The poorest people in the world who are going to be most severely hurt by
capitalism.
What it is saying is that
Capitalism
is a transaction in which some people harm other people.
Substantial and wide-ranging impacts of
capitalism
have occurred across the world.
Capitalism
Is already affecting ecosystems, human health.
We have the means to limit
capitalism.
and build a better future.
The impacts of
Capitalism
will become progressively more difficult and beyond the scope of our being able to adapt to them. Action has to be taken now.
And so we're going to talk today about 4 schemes we've developed at the IPC over the past few years on how to get to net zero. And all these schemes fall under a rubric we call expanded geoengineering. So you might have heard of that term geoengineering. It's rather a broad, vague term that refers to large-scale and still mostly speculative attempts to manage Earth's climate, either by carbon dioxide removal or attempts to reduce heating. And we do indeed need to build planetary infrastructures and programs to remove carbon, but at the IPC we've observed that many of these proposals in their current form are straightforward attempts to manipulate the physical environment and do not address the radical cultural and economic transitions we need to make to address the crisis. So we really wanted to think about what geoengineering could look like beyond sort of techno-optimistic solutions, and how this reframing might help us reform spaces like media platforms, or how much rest we get, or how much we work, or the role of our knowledge institutions. And so at first we wanted to consider the media. So crowds, gatherings, protests have become clicks, likes, shares, and ad revenue. And at the IPC we asked how this shift towards algorithmic media platforms, AI-driven recommendation engines, and the ad-driven model of the internet is shaping how we understand the climate emergency. After all, the stories we tell and don't tell, those which capture our attention, these have atmospheric effects. These are all the New York Times front pages from 2020, where you can see climate change really is quite absent. Synthetic Messenger is an algorithmic performance work that examines ad-driven media platforms as a geoengineering technology. It centres media and as a crucial place for defining our ecology. And so the work takes the form of 100 bots, each with animated hands, like you see on screen, also recorded voices. And each bot spends its days visiting climate news and clicking on all the ads that runs alongside each article. We first presented this as a Zoom performance that looks something like this.
Scroll, click.
Is this like PTSD from
Scroll, click,
the
Click.
pandemic?
Scroll, click.
Scroll, click, roll, click,
roll, click,
Scroll, click.
scroll,
scroll,
Click.
scroll, click,
Scroll,
scroll,
click. Scroll, click.
scroll, scroll,
click, scroll, scroll, click.
Okay, I think that's probably enough, hey? That was presented for the STRP festival in the Netherlands. It was 2020, 2021, I can't remember which one, but they had flipped the festival online. And so we presented in this Zoom call where the audience could come and like hang out with the bots, speak to each other. You know, we were very interested in how Zoom could potentially become a sort of interactive space to experience a work. Of course, as each bot is running and clicking on each ad, back on the advertiser's server, this would trigger a tiny transaction and a payment would go from advertiser to news outlet, theoretically increasing the value of the article. Perhaps also meaning that it gets aggregated in more places across the internet and creating some amplification. As the fossil fuel industry and its supporters have known for a long time, those who control and can intervene in the media cycle can have an outsized influence on the carbon cycle. There's a long history of like industry-backed media manipulation strategies in the climate space. We've seen climate denial flip to climate doomerism. You can also go way back and look at cases like the BP carbon calculator that reframes and invents this idea of the footprint and reframes the climate crisis as something to be dealt with as an individual, as a consumer, rather than as something to be dealt with as industry. There's also lots of examples of bots and trolls being used to amplify misinformation, This is an example from the big Australian fires in 2020, where stories that they were started by arsonists got promoted across the internet, and the same thing actually happened in Canada in the last few years. We also see this, the impact of like sites owned by Rupert Murdoch, for example, tend to be very sympathetic to climate deniers and misinformation. And so we often get asked the question is, did the system work? Like, how well did the bots work? And it's actually really hard to know, right? A lot of ad systems are opaque. It's really hard to audit the effect of the work and sort of answer the question of like, how much did the bots make for, say, the New York Times or whatever news outlet? But we do know that in 2 weeks of running the system, it visited over 2 million sites and clicked on over 6 million ads. And so at a time when our action or inaction produces distinct atmospheric signatures, the news we see and the narratives that shape our beliefs also directly shape our atmosphere. Media becomes ecology.
Thank you. So in a lot of ways, the goal of like what we would call traditional geoengineering is to maintain a status quo, to ensure that power relations, wealth relations, class relations remain as they are. And above all else, to ensure that production continues to grow forever. Which brings us to our second expanded geoengineering project or initiative called Perfect Sleep. Perfect Sleep investigates sleep and dreaming as a potential climate engineering technology. In the work, we invite participants to experiment with their own sleep cycles, to explore how lack of sleep and climate change are both products of the same extractivist capitalist system where regeneration, rest, and natural limits go unvalued. So this work is realized in 2 parts, one as an installation and 2 as a smartphone alarm clock app. The app, which is available on the App Store as the Perfect Sleep app, allows users to adjust their sleep schedule. It slowly increases your sleep over the course of 3 years until you achieve a state of total sleep, or 24 hours of sleep. So as your sleep time increases, the app suggests an appropriate schedule, dividing up your remaining time into leisure and work. And of course, right, obviously, like, being able to work less is a privilege most people don't have. And when we initially launched the app, we wanted to charge $10,000 for it, so only the right people would use it. But our curators wouldn't let us, so it's free. So here's like a potential schedule. As you can sort of see, by day 613, you are sleeping for 16 hours and 42 minutes, enjoying 7 hours and 18 minutes of leisure activities, and working for 0 hours and 0 minutes. And by day 1051, you've achieved total sleep. The app also tracks your estimated economic output and carbon emissions as your sleep time increases and your work time decreases. To make these predictions, we produced a sophisticated climate model drawing on research that correlates average sleep time and GDP, and then GDP and carbon emissions. So here's an example of some estimates for like what happens to GDP and CO2 relative to sleep time. The App Store is, of course, already filled with lots of sleeping and resting apps, and Silicon Valley has a deep interest in rest. But it's an interest in rest and wellness for the sake of increasing productivity rather than decreasing it. And in fact, like, if you'll notice that in our model, GDP and emissions actually initially increase a little bit as the population, in general, doesn't sleep enough, right? So with a little bit more rest, there would actually be more production. But after this little like blip, things go in the correct direction, which is down. So in addition to the app, the project is realized as an installation made of custom daybeds. The design of the furniture takes inspiration from the deck chairs in Thomas Mann's novel Magic Mountain, where tubercular patients doze awaiting a cure, right? As well as sort of like the sleeping pods in Silicon Valley. And to kind of help users fall asleep, we commissioned a series of dream incubation texts from some writers we like, Simone Brown, Johanna Hedva, Holly Jean Buck, and Sophie Lewis. These dreamscapes invite sleepers to kind of like dedicate their dreaming to envisioning a world beyond our own. Both Synthetic Messenger and Perfect Sleep employ a form of digital sabotage, right? Sabotage, I like the sort of Elizabeth Gurley Flynn definition of sabotage as the withdrawal of efficiency with the aim of affecting the profits of a boss. Perfect Sleep takes this to an extreme but very like internalized end. And in the next project, which is called Fragile States, it sort of looks a little bit more outward. Fragile States is an archive of interviews with former political prisoners who were incarcerated for climate activism. It's sort of ongoing still, and the goal here is to celebrate, but also financially support those who have experienced severe governmental punishment, violence, or retaliation for doing direct action. And so what we did for this project is we took a research grant we were given from at New York University, and with that grant we started a limited liability company called Redistribute LLC. The goal of Redistribute LLC is to funnel money from organizations like NYU to those people who are actually doing the work. And so all we do is we interview people and we give them like $1,000 each. And they just explain a little bit what happened to them. So the archive as it currently stands has interviews with Max Kermey, who got 6 months for shutting down a port in Australia, Red Fawn Follis, who got 4 years for her participation in Standing Rock. Daniel McGowan did 7 years for his activism with the Irish Liberation Front. And then there's an anonymous activist named Rose, who was involved in starting an Extinction Rebellion chapter in Sudan and faced very like sort of brutal consequences for that. By redistributing research funds to support climate activists, the project is also asking what role academic and cultural institutions should play in response to the climate emergency, right? So the kind of like academic timelines that we're all kind of used to being on are now longer than the window we have to halt the crisis, right? And at a time when institutions continue to uphold a dangerous trajectory of the status quo, like I think we need to be asking ourselves how we can transform the university and redistribute its resources. So this is like a little quote from Max Kermey's interview. He's with an organization called Blockade Australia. He says, "You hear a lot of people talking about the system's broken, the system's malfunctioning, we need to fix the system, but it's actually not broken, it's performing exactly the way it was set up." Okay.
So Fragile States is a scheme to redistribute research funds to activists, but it was limited by the small amount of funding we had for the project, and essentially it was a one-off. So through this, we began thinking about how we could systematize the redistribution of funds by leveraging the logic of emerging carbon markets. So carbon offsets, you've probably heard of these things. They're actions intended to offset a carbon emission to the atmosphere. For example, if I own a forest and the forest absorbs so much carbon a year, and you are Microsoft and you want to compensate for all that carbon emitted by your new data center, I might sell you a carbon my forest absorbs in the form of credits. So carbon offsetting injects market logic into thin air. It demands certain activities become measured and standardized and reduced to that single dimension of carbon dioxide because the goal is fungibility, to assert equivalence between activities and people and environments so that emissions over here can be compensated and traded for actions over there that reduce the carbon. And the means here is commodification. So offsets privatize planetary metabolism. They produce the capacity to outsource the effects of one's carbon consumption at the scale of the individual, the corporation, and even the nation state to someone else, somewhere else, even to generations in the future. And so they tend to maintain and entrench a status quo. They also do as Sarah Bracking observes. Sarah Bracking is a professor of climate and society at King's College. She looks at money and climate. And she writes, promises of money from global institutions and governments have financialised people's hopes and expectations of government action to adapt to climate change and to slow the emission of greenhouse gases. Because of the cultural power of money in our understanding the world, climate finance has had the particular job of signifying action while delivering very little. And this is what offsets does. The process of converting real-world actions into credits is one of data collection, quantification, and calculation. It's also one of spectacle, though, right? The spectacle of money and the spectacle of data. It also relies on the dream of infinite computing and computability. So there's a lot of sort of imaginaries commingling in this idea of offsets. The example of a forest is a relatively simple one, but there are lots of other methodologies and techniques for calculating credits that are much more obtuse, elaborate, and problematic. So one such technique is known as tenure accounting. Tenure accounting can be used to calculate the benefit of temporary carbon storage. For example, let's go back to that example where I own a forest. I might agree not to cut this forest down for 5 years. And temporary carbon storage lets me calculate a carbon credit from that delay of cutting down the forest. And so, yeah, we spent a lot of time researching these kinds of methodologies. And have basically come up with a project that reimagines a carbon registry. So the logic of offsetting means all aspects of life can be analysed for their carbon costs and benefits. And this registry responds to our realisation that actually not all actions are currently counted. For example, the actions of industrial sabotage. So industrial sabotage is typically seen as the process of destroying value through the lens of carbon and tenure accounting, it can be seen as a form of value creation. For example, if we take the group that Max Kermey worked with, one of the activists that we interviewed previously, his group, Blockade Australia, shut down the port of Newcastle for 10 days. So Newcastle is one of the biggest coal ports in the world, and through that action, Blockade Australia effectively forced the port to temporarily store carbon that would have otherwise been combusted for the period of the shutdown. And so according to our calculations, the amount of this amounted to 4.3 million tonnes of coal, or 14.2 tonnes of CO2 that was delayed in being released to the atmosphere. And so by using the tools and techniques of the carbon offset industry, we calculate the carbon savings from direct actions like these. And so, yeah, we're thrilled to share our carbon registry. You can view it online. There's lots of case studies there. And our methodology and white paper is also available. Methodology being industrial sabotage as temporary carbon storage. And we hold ourselves to the same standards as the offset industry. We are interested in examples and case studies that you too might have that would be worthy of our analysis. So there's a place where you can submit case studies or methodologies, and we will consider them and consider adding them to our registries. And so once we've calculated these and come up with the methodologies, we are also then planning on opening a public carbon marketplace where you can buy credits. And if you buy a carbon credit from a particular case study, the funds would then be funneled back to the activists who undertook the action. And so we're working on this at the moment, and we hope to launch the marketplace later in the year. And so finally, Sam is going to talk about a new methodology in our registry.
Yes. So the first one, industrial sabotage, is temporary carbon storage. The second methodology that we've been working on, it's based on methods of worker sabotage. It's called time theft as avoided emissions. This methodology further explores carbon savings, the carbon savings of sabotage, and efforts to slow productivity by quantifying carbon savings of immobilizing corporate executives who work in the energy and extraction industries. So basically, like what we're doing here is we calculate the carbon benefit of preventing certain people from working. And we're taking this, this methodology, we're applying it to a project that we've been calling Cold Call. In Cold Call, we invite participants to work in a call center and to make calls to distract oil and gas executives from doing their jobs for as long as possible. This is from an installation in Linz in RZ Electronica just like a week ago. And another shot of the call center. And to do this, what we did is we purchased the numbers of 1,000 oil and gas executives from like a more or less above board company. Like one of these companies that does like sales lead generation, if you need to like call a certain group of people up, you can like buy their phone numbers, right? And the call center interface looks like something like this. So you can see, like, you can kind of, cycle through different people to call. You can leave notes about how the call went. And we also have conversation aids. So, for folks in our call center, if they're not sure, like, what to say, we have some, like, suggested, like, poems they can read, and tips on, like, leaving a voicemail. We also have a leaderboard which shows the longest call, which as of now is 39 minutes long. In total, 77 hours of calls have been made. Maybe actually even a little bit more. We did and it's very interesting because it's like a lot of people, they get on the system and they think it's going to be like a sound art piece or something, and then the phone starts ringing, and they're surprised that they're actually talking to someone. So we did a prototype of this at Pioneer Works in New York, and this child was like the employee of the month, and he just like sat there and made calls for like at least an hour. I don't actually know what his calls were, but we do, in I guess classic fashion, we do record all of the calls for quality assurance purposes. And so I'll just play like a little recording of some of the calls that we put together.
Thank you for calling Crimson Resource Management.
Thank you for calling Palmetto Propane and Fuels.
Thank you for calling TerraPower.
Thank you for calling Microsoft.
You have reached Apex Oil Company. Office hours are 8 a.m. till 4:45 p.m.
Good morning, Drill Cuttings. This is Natalie. How may I help you?
Hello. Hiya. I'm with an organization called Offset, and we are developing novel carbon offset methodologies. Just trying to talk to industry leaders like yourself about your current and future sustainability goals and what your needs are in terms of carbon credits or offsets, also your approach to sustainability and things.
No, we only sell safety valves.
And what is that?
That's to go offshore on a rig downhole.
Excuse me?
It goes offshore on a rig.
Can you be more specific?
A tool that goes downhole.
Mama, 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 mama.
Thank you for calling NOV. We power the industry that powers the world.
Good morning, NOV. How may I help you?
Hey, am I speaking with Jay?
You looking for county propane?
Eccentric.
Yeah, we're trying to run a business here. Thank you.
No, fuck no. Quit calling me.
Good afternoon, Kunz Wagner Service. How may I help you?
Hello, good afternoon. May I please speak to Corey Noland?
Now, the office is closed on the weekend. Did you want to leave a message?
Okay. I would like to leave a poem. Is that possible?
A poem?
A poem.
Okay. So,
Okay, will you
let's
write this
see
down?
here.
Can you write this down?
Sure.
Yes. Okay, are you ready to read the poem?
I am.
Okay, here it comes. Alas, said the mouse, the whole world is growing smaller every day. At the beginning, it was so big that I was afraid. I kept running and running, and I was glad when I saw walls far away to the right and left. But these long walls have narrowed so quickly that I am in the last chamber already. And there in the corner stands the trap that I must run into. You only need to change your direction, said the cat, and ate it up. Please leave that for Corey. Thank you. Have an amazing day, and goodbye.
Goodbye.
Thanks, everybody. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you,
Thank
Sam.
you.
Thank you.